So the Chessboard Redefined EU security policy in the wake of Russian aggression against Ukraine is the title of our last panel of the day. We have 45 minutes and 3 speakers. Iulian CHIFU, President of the Center for Conflict Preventions and Early Warning. Thank you for joining us. With us in person also Nicole KOENIG, Head of Policy at Munich Security Conference. Thank you so much for coming. And joining us online is Mr. Emil BRIX, Director of Vienna School of International Studies. Nice to see you and hear you, hopefully, and hear you. Thank you so much. Ukrainian Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov was supposed to join us online, but the country is at war, and you will understand that the security situation in this moment didn't allow him to join us at this panel. We wish them all the luck. We have close to 40 minutes for our discussion. And before I start to ask you questions, allow me just for a few sentences to set the scene. Now, when I was thinking about EU and security and the policies that came after the Russian invasion, I remember the days before the invasion. And going back to those days, for many, it seemed so surreal that we would see tank in action again, tanks in 2022 in Europe. But since then, since that geopolitical turning point, our definition of surreal and also the security environment in Europe fundamentally changed. The EU security policy also changed, but did it adapt accordingly? And who will guarantee security in future in Europe? So these are some of the questions that we will discuss. Mr. BRIX, you being so far away from us and not being here in person, I will give you the first word. At the beginning of the Russian military invasion, German Chancellor Scholz introduced a term, a Zeitenwende, meaning a historical turning point. Now, was it followed by an adequate change of perception and action in Europe?
Thank you for the question, and welcome from Vienna. I'm sorry that I'm not with you directly. I would say it was a very good decision that the German Chancellor declared this Zeitenwende, turning point. But maybe we see now that it would have needed a bit more of common European Union member commitment to this Zeitenwende than we experience now. So the follow-up of this idea of turning point remained in the field that we show solidarity as EU27 as far as the packages of sanctions are concerned, 11 packages so far, and also as far as our moral commitment is concerned. I would say that's important. Moral commitment is part of what we need in such a situation, but it needs more. And there, as we know, the member countries of the European Union acted differently, and they tend to act more and more differently in this context. A good example is Hungary, but Hungary is not the only example. And Hungary, being even a NATO member country, is not in full support against the aggression of Russia. This is not a good sign for common European security. I would say our response, as far as security is concerned, the glass is half full and half empty. Some countries like Sweden and Finland have drawn conclusions to that, but their conclusions, not by chance, are becoming member of NATO and not relying more on European Union providing security. So my point here really is the last more than 1.5 years of the Russian war of aggression show that NATO is for the time being the only European security provider, which creates already the problem that with the US dominating NATO in many regards, it is a problematic situation for Europe.
Ms. Koenig, what are in your view the most significant changes in the EU security policy caused by the Russian invasion to Ukraine?
I think I agree with Ambassador BRIX in saying that the glass is half full and half empty. I think we have really seen a few notable changes in the EU's security and defense policy since last year, but I also think that they're not enough to live up to this Zeitenwende, to this momentous change that we are seeing. And I want to mention two examples that have also been mentioned in the previous session on NATO. So the first one is defense spending, which is a critical point. Of course, we have seen massive increases of defense spending, massive announcements across EU member states. So 20 EU member states since February 2022 have announced these increases. If you add them up, and we did that at the Munich Security Conference, this means that until 2028, you would have 61% on top as compared to pre-war forecasts. In other words, 400 billion on top. So that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. But then, even if these pledges are actually followed up upon, and that's a big if, even if that happens, still EU member states on average would be below the 2% spending goal that has just been defined as a floor and not a ceiling. They would reach only 1.8%. So that's the first point, spending. Second point, cooperation. So we heard from the EU member states, we need to cooperate more, we need to spend better together. And I think we have seen a few very notable examples thereof. I mean, we have seen a massive use of the European Peace Facility for Ukraine, 5.6 billion till today, which also has been an important cultural change for countries such as Germany, but also Nordic countries. And we have seen creative initiatives such as the EU's ammunition initiative. We have seen for the first time the EU co-funding joint procurement from the EU budget, which is quite a revolution. But again, at the same time, a lot of good initiatives. But if you look then what has happened in the past 1.5 years, you see that there has been quite a lot of uncoordinated spending. The member states, a lot of member states have bought weaponry off the shelf abroad, have not always coordinated on that. And what we see here is a risk that these short-term decisions, which are very much influenced by the sense of urgency and are very understandable in many cases, will possibly lead to long-term fragmentation of the EU's defense industrial base. And the EU's measures that we see, for example, the measures on joint procurement are very good initiatives, but they are far too small, financially speaking, in order to be a real incentive to be a game changer in terms of defense cooperation.
So really a half full and half empty, and we tend to focus more on the empty part because it brings us more problems. And talking about problems and the security situation in the wider Black Sea region is something to focus on and to worry about. Mr. CHIFU, could you give us an overview of the situation and the importance of this region for the EU security now as well as after the war?
Sure, thank you. Why the Black Sea region? Yes, it is important because the war happens there. We all knew, and that's the old plans about invasions of Europe one way or another. Napoleon in one side, Russia on the other side are passing via the plain in Central Europe. But that once, and it happens not one time, don't forget, the annexation of Crimea happens in the south, even though it was a blink to the north, but everything happened in that area. It goes together with the belief of the Russians that they need the exit to the warm seas, which means via the Black Sea, the straits to the Mediterranean and to the global ocean. What happens in the Black Sea, we've seen, and it influences not only Europe, but also the global world. It comes with food security problems, as you have seen after the blockages that Russia attempted to do, because nowadays we can say very clearly that there are numbers of transportation coming via the Ukrainian ports and exit the straits. We are completely supportive of the solidarity lanes, and I can tell you that 60% of the exports, not only in grains, but exports of Ukraine are passing via Romania. It's not easy. It's not easy to have overnight like 7 times, 9 times the quantity of goods that are pressing to enter your borders. So you need to adapt. The infrastructure is not built overnight, and you might figure out how complications are coming when you are also an exporter, the third exporter of grain in Europe. The main problem in the wider Black Sea region is about the security of transportation, of navigation, and of flight, because as you have seen, in the international waters, we've seen bustling on drones on aircrafts, NATO, EU, international. The same happening with ships. A UK ship was also fired against. Ship that has been stormed by Russian forces, a Turkish group that was inside, there was storm. Okay, at some point Russia realized that they cannot sustain the blockade, that it is complicated, especially when the vessels are passing via the exclusive economic zones or even the territory, national territories of the littoral countries. So that was why they shifted the strategy by bombing the ports and the capacities to fill up those ships with grains and with everything in export. We have this problem. We have a problem with the mines. Russia uses to let mines go. And we had, I think this morning we had the last one ship who was hit by one such mine with minor effects, but we had also some which are not so easy. And it's very complicated to really predict everything that is happening when there is somebody who's programmatically, systematically filling
Active,
you
aggressive,
with mines. We have the problem of the drones that are hitting, including our territory. Yes, it's not a direct hit. Yes, Russia didn't want to arrive there. It was one case with the interception of drones by the anti-aircraft defense.
How would you evaluate the response to all these threats? You mentioned a number of security and challenges and everything.
Well, actually, at this point, I'm okay with the image of the half full, half empty, except that what I need to tell you is that we are living in a real world with real countries, with real politicians, which have different constituencies, which are coming from different values. And I think that what we have to realize is that the steps ahead are enormous. I'm coming back to what was said here by the Zeitenwende. Zeitenwende was a dramatic change after those politics of Willy Brandt and the Russia First politics of Helmut Kohl and Angela Merkel. And it was done, okay, it wasn't overnight, because actually we all knew that the war will come, except that some allied country didn't believe. But what was very interesting from the point of view of the Germans is that Olaf Scholz appointed a group who drafted this option, even though he didn't believe that such a scenario will happen in real terms. 5 days before the war, he said, well, no, I spoke to the guy, it's just a pressure because they want to obtain something from the Ukrainians, whatever.
As I said, our definition of surreal really changed.
Has been a part of a plan that has been very well reflected on. In due time, it wasn't done in 3 days between the 24th of February and 27 when he spelled it. So it's an enormous step forward. It's the same with the defense spending. Yes, we need to move, and there is a reflection nowadays if we are considering that large-scale, high-intensity war can happen. We need to reflect this into our own threat assessments, which means a change in manpower. We need to prepare for that type, which means looking if professionals army are helping us or we should go back to conscription. Because if you want to take a large-scale, high-intensity war, it's not going to happen with, a professional army specialized in crisis management and strategic distance operation. Capabilities, we need to prepare for changing this, and it's complicated. We are democratic countries. How can you explain that tomorrow we need to change from a defense industry to war industry? High quantities, numbers, even if it's not for us, even if it's not for today, but for assisting Ukraine. You need to have the quantities in place. But what is very important, and with that I'm going to end this part, is the level of cooperation and cohesion between EU, NATO, G7, global partners, community of democracies to support the changes. And don't forget the Rammstein format. It has been alluded here. Actually, capabilities, it's about that format, which includes a number of countries from the so-called global south, which is broader and wider than the West. It's not the old idea about the West versus the East. Is that
it has its own logic.
Here.
Mr. BRIX, Mr. CHIFU said we are talking about real countries, real politicians. Now, the EU developed its first ever defense strategy last year, the Strategic Compass, but defense matters remain firmly in the hands of member states. What is the result of this?
Well, the result of this is what I said about the glass half full, half empty. We are doing procurement partly, and this was mentioned together. We are trying to have something like a European sky shield, where even neutral countries like Switzerland and Austria applied to be part of it. But we don't really have a change in the mind of how the military side of defense should look like in Europe. It's still firmly in the hand of the member states, what they do and how they do it, and how they use also their security options. And this step towards a more European approach is still in front of us. I would say it depends also on the outcome of the Russian war in Ukraine. If we are not able to do this necessary confinement, deterrence of Russia, then I feel that the, let's call it, national approach to security will be strengthened. And we see the first elements of this in various countries. When we talk about security, it's, as we know, not only the military side and these issues, but it's also sometimes you can see it in the EU formats in discussions right now. Just remember, some days ago, the foreign ministers of the European Union met in Kiev, very symbolic act, although not all of them were present as ministers, but still. But you know why this was done? It was not meant to be only a symbolic act. It was meant by Josep Borrell to be a clear conviction that 20 billion euro will be spent, extra money, for the peace facility supporting Ukraine, mainly military support. Did he get a positive response from the 27? No. No decision was taken. It was not a success. And even before the meeting, some of the member states had already indicated to the High Representative that he shouldn't do this because he wouldn't get an agreement. And also the same is true for the meeting in Granada. So even as far as this military side is concerned, it is still very much in the hands of the individual member states, and there is nothing that can be done there. The only thing where I see that there is a real common interest as far as security is concerned is supply lines. So I would certainly say, let us concentrate on this issue, because for all of the member states, the issue of energy, especially supply lines, but also other supply lines, is of high importance. And Mr. CHIFU mentioned the issue of the transport of grain and other goods through Romania. Yes, the Danube, for instance, as a supply line, is again a very important part of it. And Russia is not only sending rockets to the harbors, but they also try to avoid that we Europeans are able to improve the possibility of the Danube to take bigger ships and transport possibilities up the river. So security includes also organizations like the Danube Commission, where at the moment there is a discussion what to do in the future, because Russia is a suspended member of this old commission, the oldest commission of any European river. And the question is, for future security, what should we do? One of the proposals is, because you cannot simply throw out Russia, according to statutes of the Commission, to recreate a new commission without Russia. And similar things we see in the security issue as far as the OSCE is concerned. I will stop here, but the future of the OSCE...
When we think that we understand the complexities of the situation, we just become aware of the new level. Now, Ms. Koenig, whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, that was the message that Europe sent in the beginning, and that it is sending throughout this aggression. 590 days of war, but now the Prime Minister of Poland says we will stop sending weapons, we want to arm ourselves. Ukraine is not sending it. A few other countries are on this kind of way of thinking. Some say it is the beginning of the conflict fatigue. Do you see it? Is it too soon right now to think that such thing might happen? Or are we seeing real signs of fatigue conflict?
Now, the first point I want to make is, and you actually asked that question in a previous panel, that what we hear, if we listen closely, is not a whatever it takes. It's a as long as it takes. And it's a big difference, because also if you look, for example, at the European Council conclusions of June, you also see security commitments for Ukraine and not security guarantees, and I think that's exactly this difference. But to come to your question on fatigue and on the Polish mentioning of not sending weapons anymore, I think that this particular example has been a little bit blown out of proportion. I think it also has to be seen against the backdrop of the electoral campaign. Things are very polarized, and we also, I think, have to remind ourselves that Poland has been one of the staunchest supporters of Ukraine. They simply have given a lot of their weapons. Their own stocks are rather depleted, and they have done a lot. So let's remember that. But I think what you are saying, and what is a little bit calling into question also this as long as it takes, I'm much more worried about what we have seen in the US, because obviously this as long as it takes is very much bound also to the partnership with the US, which has taken an important leadership role. And I'm also concerned about the outcome of the Slovak elections, which have been won on the premise of actually stopping military assistance to Ukraine. And if we now take the European Peace Facility that you have mentioned, and also other issues such as the Ukraine facility, so all of the measures that are currently on the table to provide these security commitments to Ukraine until the end of the year, we're expecting a package. Well, then if we think about perhaps other veto players in this field on the European Peace Facility, I'm not saying that these are the only ones, there are also other ones that are skeptical, but also on the Ukraine facility, I think here we might really have a problem. And on the US, I think in the short term, President Biden has underlined it, that they will continue to support Ukraine, but obviously what we're seeing in the US, what we have seen in the past weeks, shows that it's very much becoming a domestic issue, and that could become an issue in next year's electoral campaign, not to speak of the election itself.
Yeah, because 590 days is not a small number, it's a big number. And now the countries, as you said, have given a lot already. And now we will just enter new election cycles. We have EU elections coming in the next year. What is your view? Will that change something, or is that kind of a speed bump in the decision and to help Ukraine, to keep on helping Ukraine? Do you see it as a possible challenge, the election year?
I don't think that the European Parliament elections will be a roadblock in terms of assistance to Ukraine. I'm saying this because I think it's much more national elections that play a role, and it's very much focused on the military side, because if you look at public opinion polls in the European Union throughout, you still see a very strong majority support for Ukraine, for reconstruction, et cetera, also for enlargement. So I think the key question to watch will be national elections and the question of military assistance, and they are very much depending on the member state.
If I may continue this, because it's worth making some compliments to all of this. First, yes, it's electoral campaign, it's internal electoral campaign, but it won't change dramatically the evolution. If you look at Poland, it was very well underlined. If it is about Slovakia, You've seen that it's already a step back in the way of presenting it. They won't stop the transit. It's just a matter of sending their own resources, which they don't have anymore in real terms, because everything has been set. About the US, there is a big question mark. It's a matter of 1 month. Yep. Actually, the problem is the election of the of the president of the chamber. We all know that on the 17th of October, actually, if we will have a president of the chamber, all this matter will be somehow solved. And in any case, there are possibilities, as long as you have the executive branch, to solve a number of matters. For instance, resending Iranian captured ammunition or something like that. So it is not to be diminished or ignored, but things are not that way. Even if at the end of next year, the presidential election in the US, Donald Trump is re-elected, you've seen that any democracy has a number of groups around, and it won't change dramatically.
But he said that he would end the war in 24 hours if he won.
Okay. It's an electoral statement coming from Donald Trump. That's my
Donald
only
Trump.
comment
That's
in
what
that,
I'm saying.
in that direction. It's just that my point is that Trump will not change the evolution of, because it's far more important. And I will re-underline what was said this morning. We cannot afford Ukraine to lose this war.
To lose.
And it's a fact of life, and you're going to hear it more and more. Don't forget another very important point which changes dramatically. Yes, in the final statement of the NATO summit in Vilnius, not an inch of NATO countries' territory will be let. Why? We learned the hard way how difficult it is to regain territory once it is occupied. It changes dramatically the defense and deterrence posture and our way of looking at things. We are moving to a forward defense, which means that we will see plans that will not allow anybody getting at the borders of NATO and stepping in, which is dramatically in terms of military planning. It doesn't mean this is for giving you the arguments that things are moving ahead. The only thing is the level of expectation and the knowledge about the mechanisms that are making this change. At the EU level, at the NATO level, that was why I alluded to the fact that we are talking about real people, real politicians, the one that want to step on the stage, take votes, and go to the offices. And this means that there is a way of adapting to the reality, and the level of expectation should not be, that everything will be solved overnight, that we have voted, or we've heard the Zeitenwende and Germany changed this, and in 1 year time they will spend 100 billion to support Ukraine or to do whatever. It's dramatic from one point of view because in Ukraine there's a war.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest problem and responsibility, how we are dealing with the realities around us, how we are convincing, but I'm very much, very well, that the three aspects of power of the EU, the most important one is the normative power. So it has the means, not overnight, but to curb any outside will or the capacity of making consensus at a number of high number, 27, 28 plus, which is also very important. And these are leverages, but it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen the way that we will like to do it, if it is a dictatorship, an autocrat.
Mr. BRIX, you mentioned that NATO has strengthened its role as the only credible defense alliance for European security. Now, there is this kind of thought that what if China attacks Taiwan and the NATO focus shifts away from Europe at some point in time, because the Russian officials saying this war will go on. Who will defend Europe? What would happen with European security if such a shift of focus happens? Is it possible?
Well, you hinted the idea of European sovereignty and European autonomy. For the time being, we still very much depend on what has been said about NATO as a security alliance and security provider. And it has been said that the NATO summits always state that NATO territory will not be given, not an inch of it. This will be still be for the foreseeable future the only security provider that is feasible. The European Union is not in a position to give a similar assurance, although it has this clause of support and solidarity in the treaties. But the US I think very well that their interest, even in the case that they have to shift interest to Taiwan, will not be able to get out of Europe. So whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever runs the administration, the interest in Europe, as I see it, will not really decline. And that means that we can say that the Russian war of aggression, very ironically, has proven how important for the US and for the European Union this transatlantic partnership is, and that it will not change. And let me say just one more to European Parliament election. I fully agree, and that's part of the problem of the European Parliament, that whatever the outcome will be, there will not be a major change in the role of the European Parliament, but on the national level, there may be more dramatic changes in the position of member countries of the European Union. And this certainly may happen. In my own country at the moment, the most pro-Russian populist party is running first in the opinion polls, and if they have a decisive voice in a coalition government in Austria, I am sure that it would be a totally different picture as far as our position on this war is concerned. So I think it's dramatic what happens next year on the membership level, but it's not dramatic what will happen in the European elections. What makes me optimistic is the public opinion polls, which have been mentioned, that there is still a broad support by the majority in all the member countries for supporting Ukraine, and this is a continuous support. And we are talking about 160 days or 300 or 590 days of war. I don't know how many, but there is a continuous public opinion support. And the consequences of all of this for the Balkan countries is, I think, with the Russian war, also the growing interest of the security side of the European Union people on what happens in the Western Balkans will also be quite a continuous positive element if it is taken up by both the European Union and the Western Balkan countries. But this is something you discussed already during the conference.
If you allow 10 seconds.
Definitely.
I fully support what was said here, but I think that what you need to think is not that US will get out of European security, but that Europeans should step in the Indo-Pacific security and to assist US and the other global allies who are now with us here, to assist them for any perspective, let it put it that way.
Yes, I did not mention this, but you are absolutely right, and I think it was wrong by President Macron to speak out so much against a European involvement in the Indo-Pacific, but he retreated already, as we know. So I think the Europeans have learned that they have to play a global role in the future geopolitical chessboard.
And France is an actor in the Indo-Pacific, by the way.
Yes.
Ms. Koenig, before stepping into Indo-Pacific, what should EU countries do to step up in this security challenge that is closer to home? We have been talking and maybe focusing more on the glass half empty. You mentioned some of the aspects of glass half full, some little steps in cooperation and so on. But what are the big steps that should happen? Maybe even idealistic big steps. What is the end goal that we should move toward to?
Well, I think in the short term, it's really about the security commitments for Ukraine. This is something that has to happen very soon. I think we need to have an agreement on topping up the European Peace Facility for Ukraine. This is really important because if Ukraine knows that it has this longer term perspective, it can also plan in a completely different way. So I think that's the first point, and I think it also for the EU important to actually gradually integrate Ukraine more into its defense initiatives. European Peace Facility is one, joint procurement is another area where there are already bonuses if the member states procure and then give weapons to Ukraine. But there could also be other options, such as integrating it as an associate partner in PESCO, in the European Defence Fund. Mm-hmm. So to really think ahead what it means, these security commitments, and then also to have a more concrete path towards real security assurances in the future. I think it's important to think a bit more concretely about this path towards NATO, but it's also very important to think about the EU's role as a security community. Yeah. Should not forget that we have a mutual assistance clause, which has not really been put to test so far, but with Ukrainian accession in the cards, I think we really should start now to think about the meaning of this clause and to actually put some operational planning behind that. So that's kind of in the short term focused on Ukraine. I think in the medium to long term, what is really important is to really live up to this promise to spend more and better together. As I said, I think we have seen quite some good initiatives, but we have still the incentives that are put on the table are too small. We still have too much disparate planning among the member states. So I think it's a good idea to have a European defense industrial strategy. It's a good idea to really discuss together what are joint priorities, what are the priorities where the member states can actually cooperate and make a difference, and to then provide common incentives for this cooperation at European level. I think
so to think and act bigger and better.
Exactly, and I think we should already think ahead to the next multi-annual financial framework, because this is where a larger share of funding from the EU budget could be placed. I know in the short term it's difficult, and I think it's also a very good sign that we are seeing a real discussion on the European Investment Bank and the possibility to actually fund projects in the area of defense as well.
I have a feeling that we kind of finalized our discussion, and maybe I would just like to ask the audience if there are some more questions. We are running low on time. We have 1 more minute. We have one question. We have 2 questions, okay? So 2 quick questions and then short answers also. Is there another question there? Yes? Okay, please.
Thank you. My name is Evgenia Gabbard, Ukrainian foreign policy analyst. I have this problem with the half full, half empty glass approach, because when we are talking about defense and deterrence, I'm not sure that this is the most efficient approach. Because if you have loopholes in the sanctions regime, this means that the sanctions regime as such is not working. If we have Russian drones crashing in the middle of Zagreb, this means that this is a problem for the European security. If we have attacks on Orlovka-Isakcha crossing point, this means that Romania itself is not protected. So half measures do not work with aggressor. And my question to the esteemed panel would be, do you really think that Europe is now ready to have this cognitive Zeitenwende in basically going all in against Russian aggression and not limiting itself to these half measures in different spheres? Thank you.
Going all in. Who is volunteering?
I can start. No, I think it's a very important point. Thank you for putting it so clearly. And I think we didn't suggest that we agree with this half glass, half full approach, but that this is actually a real problem. And that this cognitive Zeitenwende has to happen. And I think this is, we're still not there at the European level. I think we still need to live up to these promises. We need to do much more, and we need to see the shift. Sometimes when I was in Brussels in spring, I got this feeling that yes, well, okay, things have changed, but still member states are doing a little bit their own things and are not cooperating enough and are waiting for a Zeitenwende 2.0. And I think this is just not an option. I think we don't have the time to wait for another wake-up call, and we need to live up to these promises now.
We have a question here.
If I may add, simply add something.
No, you first, and then I'm just waving to the gentleman in the front. He will be after you.
Okay. My name is Tom O'Donnell. I'm American, but I work in Berlin on energy and geosecurity. As one aspect, I think a very big aspect of what we're talking about, the capacity of Europe, is the economic and energy side. So obviously, a strategy of if Putin can't win the war in an offensive, but if he drags it out, there's this tremendous energy hit to Europe. And it's a sort of Achilles heel of Europe, and in particular Germany, I would say. So just very quickly to say, like, years ago in the 70s in my country, in the United States, there was this energy hit, and it had this rust belt, a tremendous destruction of industry. But the United States was also the center of the third industrial revolution and so on and so forth, and had a lot of finance and recovered. If you look at Germany, in the heart of Europe, they're in a very bad situation. People are saying, well, we'll innovate out of this. We're going to lose our big business. And many people are saying, in the ministries actually, that, degrowth is our aim anyway. Let's get rid of them and we'll innovate out of it. But they haven't invested for 20 years in R&D, and the highest ranked university in the country is 49th in the world. So I think this is a very serious Achilles heel that Putin has, got his finger on, and I'm curious to see what people think about this issue.
Well, I just can confirm, and I will take the energy part, and I will underline that it falls under the half full part of our glass. The capacity of Germany to adapt it to the cut of the gas coming from Russia is tremendous. It's going to be a kind of dismantling a little bit. They will rebuild. It's not going to happen overnight, and not in the winter that comes on us. We have to take care for the next winter, and fortunately our storages are full. In that very point, and I will come back also to what has been said about the half measures, I will not call them half measures, they are measures. Measures done in a real world, in democracy, where states and political figures are doing their part of the job. What is very important is for us to do what we can do. Like, for instance, cyber defense, cyber security. We have the Excellence Center in Bucharest, a resilience center. It is offered, and a number of Ukrainians and a number of issues in Ukraine, Republic of Moldova are done via this center, not talking about the Center of Excellence for Special Operation Forces and some other, and energy security, it has been alluded, which is also very happy that Romania supported Republic of Moldova when it was completely cut, and at some point even Ukraine.
We will give a few minutes to Mr. BRIX. Would you like to touch upon the questions that we heard from the audience? And then we will just get the third question really quickly, because we are out of time. 3 minutes ago.
Yes, I would love to stress that I use the image of the glass of water, not because I like the situation, but because we have to analyze it. And when we analyze it, the glass is certainly not full. It doesn't mean that I don't feel, we should feel it immediately. But if we are in the real world, then we have to say a lot of things have not been able, in spite of all our rhetoric of solidarity, which has substance in it. And the point about energy, certainly energy has been used by Russia as a weapon for quite some time. The Ukrainians experienced it already before the war, the European experiencing it now, and I think this is one of the problems that we have. We have a division of labor, as I see it, still, between what NATO is doing, between what the European Union is doing. And I know from my time as ambassador in Russia that the Russians, Kremlin is simply not afraid of the European Union, but afraid of NATO. And that's a fact. And one could say then NATO is really the strategic military aspect of deterrence, and the European Union is the economic norm-setting adversary of Russia. But the question is, is it good that we still try to divide between these two aspects of security? And my answer would be no.
No,
The European Union, as we have heard, has also to include elements of deterrence which has more to do with the military and directly strategic side of events.
We had one more question, but we are really low on time. So if you could be just really short in your question.
Okay, I'm Colonel Saito, Japanese Defense Attaché, accredited to Austria, Montenegro, and OSCE, living in Vienna. So, as I hear BRICS said, I hear often the discussion about the new European security, and especially with Russia and without Russia. And so usually the answer is, so European security without Russia is impossible. Maybe because I'm living in Austria. So I'm neutral, in neutral country. My question is, OSCE is one of the options, but OSCE couldn't stop the war. So my question is it still possible to establish a European security with Russia? And if yes, what does it look like?
The question is for Mr. BRIX?
Well, for everyone. I mean.
Okay.
Well, this is very easy. It has been already solved. The new security in Europe will be without Russia. And on that particular point, allow me also to congratulate the organizers for having this panel with a gentle balance. Exactly. And also, we have to appreciate the work that Jasmina has done, because it is her third panel, I think, today, and she has even tomorrow summit, tremendous job, and also thank you very much for saving the best for last. Is it, Mr. BRIX?
Thank you so much. Mr. BRIX, would you like to touch upon this question?
Not really, because
Okay.
just let me say, at the moment, security with Russia is certainly impossible, European security. But there are still a lot of players on the field in Europe who say you cannot change geography. That's why you can't rule out Russia forever. So that's the reason why the OSCE is still sitting in Vienna and working towards better times.
Okay. Do you want to comment, or are we out of words?
I agree with Ambassador BRIX.
Thank you so much for this. This was the last panel of the day. Thank you so much, everybody.